Okay, it's the Conservation Commission meeting on April 13th. We are waiting for our chairman. Rory, would you like me to read the little introduction?
So he just joined as a participant, Andrea, if you want to promote him.
Stefan, woohoo, promote to panelist. Stefan, can I give you co-host? There you go.
Oh, there we go, unmuted. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, you are now co-host, Stefan.
Thanks. Sorry, running a few minutes late. There's a wild bedtime over here.
You don't have your video on yet.
Should be coming online.
There you go.
All right. Just getting set up over here in just a moment.
Yeah, one thing we learned about the last meeting was that if anybody has a scratchy audio, you should rejoin your audio by using the phone number at the top of the agenda.
It's very helpful.
ECAT had a little trouble with their audio recording last time.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, well, I get this first hearing pulled up. So just a couple things to note this evening with this, intense weather we're experiencing right now. I know the lights at my house have been flickering on and off kind of all afternoon. So there's a very real possibility that this, meeting gets cut short because of the weather, in which case all the meetings will be continued to our next meeting on the 27th. That's correct, Andrea?
That is correct, April 27th.
Great. So hopefully that's not the case and we can get this all done tonight, but just in case, it's pretty nasty out there, it seems. And a couple other things to note. Pursuant to Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, suspending certain portions of open meeting law, GLC 30A, 20, this meeting of the Easton Conservation Commission will be held remotely due to the state of emergency existing caused by the outbreak of COVID-19. Public access to this meeting shall be provided by accessing a link in the meeting agenda, which may be found at the top of each agenda of the Conservation Commission during this period. The link will provide public access through telephone or internet-enabled audio or video conferencing to allow for the proceedings of the Easton Conservation Commission and allow for active real-time participation by members of the Commission, applicants, and the general public. Please note that this meeting is being televised and recorded. All motions to approve and deny an application shall be done by a roll call vote and reference the delegation of signatures to the Easton Environmental Planner as voted at the April 6th meeting. And Andrea has taken the opportunity to download the site plans from Permatize to her computer just in case we lose the connection to the town server. Again, hopefully it doesn't become an issue, but you never know. So let me just get set up here with screen sharing. All right, so for 232 Prospect Street, which is where we'll start off. Oh, I guess one more thing. We're going to take all the hearings in order as shown on the agenda. We're going to try to limit them to 15 minutes each, unless unless the chair authorizes a longer period of time. We recognize that some of these are a little more in depth and will require more time, but at least for planning purposes of people waiting, that's the general plan for tonight's proceedings. All right, so for 232 Prospect Street, where would you like us to start? Which plan?
Which plan? I think there's only one. It looks like the top left one there. Yep, 319.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
There we go.
Yep, ready whenever you guys are.
All right, go ahead. Do you want control so you can point things out, or are you good?
I think I can explain it pretty well without, if you want to follow me around with the cursor, that could work as well.
Sure.
I'll try to be short. For the record, Peter Lyons with Collins Engineering Group, representing the homeowner who is attending as an attendee tonight to this meeting. We might call her up later, I guess.
Just tried to promote her.
For a septic repair. Doing is commissioning the out in the back of the property, reading the plumbing through the house, and providing a pump system in the yard. We do have wetlands on the sides of the property, so we're contending that as well as the pool. Putting the system out in the front yard is, as compliant as possible, as we, it's the best place we can fit on the site. A couple things with the wetlands, standard practice, we have erosion control silt sock shown around the project, including the work happening out back, decommissioning the old tank. Show soil stockpile on the site in front of the house. And we also show conservation medallions along of the existing wetlands, a total of 8 of them. Yeah, 8 locations. So the system is all staked out. The erosion control is staked as shown on the plan, as well as the post location. This is a failed system. The house is on it, so it is an urgency thing. If there's any questions from the commission, I can do my best to answer them. Who wants to start?
I guess, one thing to note is we very rarely see you guys actually change the plumbing from one side of the house to the other. So, and it looks like you got a pretty tight envelope where you did put it. So that's one thing that's definitely out of the ordinary here, that you guys took the step of relocating all that to get the septic up front, which I think is great, and further away from the wetland. Rory, do you have any questions?
Just clarify for me. So moving it to the front, the actual closest portion of the septic system to the wetland on the side is 18 feet. Is that correct?
The proposed septic tank is 18 feet to the closest flag, yes, and the leaching field is 37 feet.
And how does that compare to keeping it where it would have been in the backyard?
Keeping it where it would have been in the backyard, contending with the pool, the patio, the existing tanks, would present an issue trying to place 2 tanks back between the in-ground pool and the house. The groundwater is definitely higher in the backyard. As you get closer to the wetlands, there is a little bit of a grade change up front that's helping us, have a little less obvious of a mound there.
Yeah, at least 3 feet,
yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't be, even if we could, eliminate the patio, hypothetically, we wouldn't be gaining any significant advantage versus where it is. From a construction standpoint, the easiest thing is to have the tanks out front, all the trucking being yard. Little is going to happen out back. They're just going to pump the existing tank and fill it with, clean sand, and very minimal disturbance behind the house. So we're kind of containing all the work up front.
Okay, fair enough.
Carol, any questions?
I think there was some talk about the knotweed on the property. Do we have the applicant?
Yes, the applicant is here. I promoted her. And
can you hear me?
yes, and now I'm gonna start your video if you want to be seen.
I'm in the dark because we have no power here, so I'm just on my phone here in the dark. But
Okay.
Oh man,
seems to be working okay so far.
There you go.
There you are.
there we go. Hello.
Hello, guys. Yeah, I had spoke to Carol about the Japanese knotweed that's on the property. it's pretty bad in two areas, and one of them is this area that we're talking about here. And for the past several years, I've been trying to take care of it as best. I'm a gardener, so I've researched it, and I've been doing what I think is the best practice. And it's definitely controlled it. It's thinned it out. It's not coming back as much as it had been in the past. So I don't know if I need a new plan, or if I just continue with what I'm doing currently. Carol, and going back and forth in our emails today, you suggested that instead of what I'm doing, possibly to mow the area, but there's no way to get a lawnmower in these areas where the knotweed is.
Okay, that sounds fine. I mean, what you've been doing with cutting it and immediately dabbing it with Roundup, that it sounds like that's been effective for you. Like it sounds like the knotweed is not getting bigger. So
it's not getting bigger,
that's
no.
a good thing.
Yeah, I'd say it's receding a little bit, but not completely. So I guess it's the best I can hope for,
Right.
that we can hope for.
Yeah, that's good. And I had emailed along a couple of other ways to go about it, but I wonder if doing that next to a wetland is something maybe the Conservation Commission maybe would have liked to have known about. So I wonder what how we can help kind of codify that.
Okay.
I would recommend that if you so choose, that you include the authorization and conditions as part of this project. It's been observed on site, and we're talking about it at a public hearing.
Right. Yeah, work on site to mitigate the knotweed.
Right. We also emailed about using rodeo instead of Roundup. Rodeo is the wetland safe version of Roundup, the glyphosate. I think the regular Roundup, if I remember correctly, I'm not a soil scientist or a chemist. The regular Roundup binds very strongly to soil particles, and
okay.
the rodeo is better suited for uses in wet areas.
Okay. Yeah, I'd use that if it's available to retail consumers.
That's a good question. I don't know if it is.
I don't know.
But a nursery man would help us with that. Let me know if we put it, if the commission chooses to put in the agenda, in the decision, rodeo. Jojo, just let me know if you can't find it.
Okay.
And we'll address it at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with putting it in the conditions that we're approving the use of it specifically for the use of mitigating the knotweed.
Right. One other aspect, Jojo, you said in your email that it's really rare for you to use any kind of chemicals in your yard. So you're really opposed to using Roundup, but in this case.
Yeah, it's really the only thing that I use it for, because I just don't, I have a pool, so I've got young nieces that are over here all the time, rolling around in the grass and everything. So I just don't use any chemicals.
Right.
But this, I just thought it would made sense to do it because it was just encroaching on the concrete of the pool and wrapping itself around fence posts, and so that's why I just used such a tiny bit on that cut exposed end once it's cut.
Right. So I guess what I'm getting at is, if you do find rodeo, we'd sure like you to dispose of the regular Roundup properly, like at Hazardous Waste Day. Like you'll have
sure, definitely. Yep.
A bottle of Roundup, like, oh crap, I bought that and now I'm not going to use it. So
just as a point of information, I just did a quick Google search and it's available on Amazon, so it must be available to a consumer.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, Rory.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Anything else, Kara?
No, thanks.
All right, Michael?
No, I'm good. I'm happy with those plans.
Great. And John?
Nope, everything sounds good.
All right, great. Let's see, let me just open up the participants. Any public comment on 232 Prospect Street?
Nobody raised their hands.
Not seeing anything. Great. Peter, would you like to close?
Yes, please.
All right. Let me just see if there were any special conditions here on the staff report. Medallions. Invasive species, span lawn care. Great. All right, so motion to issue permit to work in order of conditions for 232 Prospect Street with the conditions noted in the staff report, noting that we are acknowledging the on-site work that's been done by the homeowner to mitigate the knotweed, that we're recommending the use of rodeo over regular Roundup where applicable for controlling the knotweed.
Caulfield, second.
All in favor?
Caulfield's aye.
Lundin, aye.
Mike, aye.
Thomas, aye.
Catino, aye. All right, thanks, guys.
Can I ask for one amendment, Stefan?
Yeah, sure.
That each of these approvals recognize that the that you affirmatively acknowledge and want to use the delegation that we talked about last August, that we talked about April 6th, so that you, rather than
That
come
you or
in
I
to
can
sign-
sign
yeah,
instead
rather
of the
than come
whole.
in to sign the documents, that they get delegated to Stefan and myself as you voted.
Okay. All right, so, and we should note that in each motion.
I think, yes, until I get it recorded, I think you should probably verify the votes.
All right. So amend that motion to add in the delegation of signing off on it to Andrea and or myself.
Caulfield, second.
All those in favor?
Caulfield's aye.
Lundin, aye.
Spadia, aye.
Thomas, aye.
Catino, aye. Great. Thanks, Jojo.
Thank you, guys. See you next time.
Thanks, Peter. Oh no, I got rid of my agenda. Bear with me. All right. 530 and 550 Turnpike Street.
I'm bringing in Brad. I'm moving you up to panelist. Brad this is 530, 550 Turnpike is the ANRAD filing for the miniature golf facility.
Okay, looks like the latest plans we have are were uploaded April 8th.
There's Claire. How about Brad? Do you have a video, Brad? Unmute.
Hey there.
Hi, Claire. What about Brad?
Oh, did he drop off?
Looks like it.
Yeah, looks like it.
Oh,
I wonder if
completely
he
off.
lost power.
Right, he's not a panelist and he's not a attendee. Okay, well, so here we go. This project was, we started this hearing back before the regs. Keith said, does Joe, second, okay. We started this ANRAD review back in the fall, and then in January we changed our regulations to speak to wetland vegetation that was in stormwater facilities. So this project withdrew and resubmitted as a new application under the revised regulations. We have lost him. I'm not getting him back. So I don't remember if all of you were here at the time, but I believe so. This is a project that has, if you go to the sheet, we do have the abutter notifications, so that's not a problem.
Andrew, do you want to drive?
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks.
Yep. Just a moment.
There we go. How do I do it? I am controlling. Okay, can you see my little cursor?
Yep.
Moving around? Okay, so here is Turnpike Street at the top of the plan, the parking lot and the pro shop for the driving range, a stormwater basin at the edge of the parking area, and then over here is batting cage and miniature golf and more parking. Of interest to the application, you have a large wetland system over here that goes from sheet 2 to 5. And on the other side of the property, from sheet 3 up at Turnpike Street all the way down to sheet 6. Those are two large bordering vegetated wetlands within the Hockomock Swamp ACEC. There is I did make him a panelist, Keith. He's already a panelist. So between the two wetland areas, we have a ditch. It's referred to as the fairway ditch that goes from one side to the other. There's a high point in right here underneath the cartway, but every time I was there, and Nova Armstrong, who was our consultant at the time, saw water flowing. Historically, there is a connection between the two streams. So back in 2014, the Conservation Commission denied the project for lack of information, denied the request for wetland boundary review. And they specifically called this a intermittent stream type 1, a headwater type stream. There's another intermittent stream over here at the top of sheet 2. This one was evaluated. Claire, I think, did our review on this as well as Nova Armstrong. This is evaluated as a type 3 intermittent stream. Based on my review, having been at both sites, I agree with that. I agree with both those things. The wetland flagging on the plan stops here on the west side, and it stops here on the east side. But in reality, the wetland goes all the way along 3 sides of the fairway. You have a fairway with nice cut grass, and you have a wetland on either side of it. It's important, if you choose to approve this ANRAD, that in the recommendations, I identify which flags are on site, and it's a limited boundary review, because we're not saying that the boundary doesn't extend farther. When Brad reviewed my staff report, he said that it was okay with the applicant that they have a limited boundary review because they don't expect to do any redevelopment of the site on this side, on the if north is at the top of the plan, down on the south side of the fairway plan, all the redevelopment of the site is planned to be up in this area here, since that's the best upland.
That's east-west orientation, just so you know.
I thought it was. Okay.
West is at the top and east is at the bottom.
Thank you. Thank you. That made sense to me. You know what? I saw this north arrow here on the locus. It was throwing me off. Thank you very much. So yes, this east side is not going to be part of the development. So the fact that the wetland lines don't continue is not a problem. There happen to be 7, count them, potential vernal pools in the B series wetland down here where my cursor is going back and forth on sheet 5. So we did identify their wetland professional identified a short piece of water line as it on the section of the pool that is closest to the fairway, and so we used that as this being the boundary of the potential vernal pools, and this being the 100-foot line of the potential vernal pools. They have been viewed by the wetland professionals of the applicant and our consultants in the fall as well as in the spring, and they do appear to have vernal pool characteristics. So we also have a flood zone on the property but they're not asking us to include that in the boundary review because it doesn't have an elevation, and they're not doing the floodplain evaluation to come up with one. So no need. So other than the fact that, and then everybody, the applicant, and has agreed with the staff report in the latest response to comments on the types of wetlands we see. So that brings me up here. If you can zoom up a little bit so we can talk about this drainage basin, Stefan, unless anybody have any questions about the natural wetlands on site? Okay.
Let me just see if there's a zoomed in on the plan itself.
There it is.
Is that good there?
Yeah, there it is, right there.
Okay.
So natural wetlands on the site, got it. You know, here's our northerly C-series wetland. There's our fairway ditch, otherwise known as an intermittent stream type 1. And here is our southerly B-series. But up here, interestingly enough, is a riprap area, a basin, and a head wall coming into a drainage basin this way, and then you have a catch basin over here and a catch basins over here coming into the basin. This is an established stormwater detention basin that was designed and constructed and is being operated as a stormwater detention basin. It was designed according to our Mass DEP stormwater regulations, so the state doesn't consider this a wetland resource area. When we revised our regs in January, we couldn't say it isn't an oh, and by the way, it's full of cattail marsh, which is a good thing because cattail marshes actually pick up the nutrients, so it makes it actually a BMP. So it looks like an isolated land, isolated vegetated wetland, and by our local bylaw, it is an isolated vegetated wetland. But by our regulations, since it is been designed, constructed, and maintained as a stormwater basin, it can continue to be maintained as a stormwater basin. I would recommend that you make that a condition of your ANRAD, that this is first and foremost stormwater detention. Hey, Brad, did you hear me? Did I do well? Unmute. You're back.
I'm back.
So I don't know if you heard me. I just went through all the different types of wetlands for you.
I did. I thank you, Andrea. I dialed in and you did a great job, and you couldn't hear me, obviously.
No, until we saw you. So does anybody have any questions for the applicant? Applicant's representative?
Rory, you can start us off. Go ahead.
So the no, I mean, I think this is the one thing that's a little bit, so this wetland on the northerly side, does that extend more east than what is marked there? Or are we worried about that?
It extends farther down here. It does.
Yeah.
Are we worried about it?
I don't mean worried about it. It's not designated on the plan, and so I think we just. I mean, I know we're talking about limiting which flags we're actually confirming on here, but that wetland does extend further down, right?
Like the wetland does extend. It kind of simulates the limit of the Zone A line.
Yep. Right.
To the, I guess, east.
Correct. Right. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of make that note that as long as we understand that those flags aren't on here, and if we're not being asked to confirm them, then I'm okay with that too. So.
Yeah, that area is located almost entirely within the Zone A. It's a natural heritage priority and estimated habitat. It's an ACEC. You've got the vernal pool buffers. It's the applicant doesn't intend on doing anything in that area. I don't even know that it's developable, given all the constraints.
Something you'll never hear me say on TV.
I mean, that was really my only comment. I'm glad that we were able to deal with the stormwater basin in a manner that was consistent with how we expect the regs to handle stormwater basin. So I'm glad we were able to refile it.
Agreed. Carol, anything?
I'd like to hear more about the fairway ditch / type 1 stream.
What in particular?
What regulations might apply to it?
If I may, Brad.
Go ahead.
So the stream is seen at the edge of the C series wetland here on the north side of the site. The ditching goes across the fairway underneath the cart path, and then goes over to the B series wetland right over here. Once it gets into the wetland areas, it kind of spreads out and is more braided. But there's a clear connection, and as I was saying earlier, Brad, it's there was always a connection there on the historic topos, according to the review of the earlier wetland review of this project. So what Brad did was put right here a 75-foot no disturb zone to intermittent creek resource type 1. So he's identifying, and then he also has a 100-foot line too.
Oh, that's this black dashed line here.
That's
Is it?
And that's the 75-foot, right? And then there's the 200-foot
The
water.
brown is the 200.
And goes up this way. There, perfect, Stefan. So the riverfront zone goes up to the driving range structure, but the no disturb zone goes halfway up the driving range grass. Now
and that matches our regulations on the type 1 intermittent.
Yes, but recognize it's not really a no disturb zone because it's been disturbed since pre-86, but it still says no structures 75 feet within that kind of ditch.
Sounds
Does
good.
that answer your question, Carol?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Anything else, Carol?
No, thank you.
Yeah. Mike, any questions?
No, I got nothing to add. That's cool with me.
Great. John, anything?
Nope, looks straightforward to me.
All right, awesome.
Brad, did you get that?
Yeah, I too. I'm glad you guys were able to refile to handle the stormwater basin as it should be handled, and I'm also glad we were able to all come to agreement on the resource areas and move this one along for you guys. I think.
Great. I appreciate the commission showing some consideration for the refiling and the filing fees to allow us to refile under the new regulations. Although the state regulations, I think, as I did hear Andrea mention, the state regulations exempt it as being a wetland resource area altogether. Your bylaw just adds some clarity now that it is an IBW jurisdictional under your bylaw, but the ongoing maintenance of the basin would be allowed under the bylaw.
Sounds right. All right, is there any public comments on 530, 550 Turnpike Street? Seeing any hands raised. All right, would you like to close?
Sure.
All right. Motion to issue an ORAD for 530, 550 Turnpike Street with the conditions noted in the staff report, and that this is a limited boundary review to the specific flags noted, and that the stormwater detention basin is indeed an engineered stormwater management system and will be regulated as such under the town's bylaws. Anything else we needed to add in there, Andrea, or is that it?
I can't see my staff report. I've still got your screen.
Oh, hang on. I can pull it up.
Perfect. It's today's. Yep. Yeah, there you go. He's added And the D series is that's the, okay, good. You got them all. Thank you very much.
Great. Can I get a second?
Caulfield, second.
All those in favor?
Caulfield's aye.
Lundin, aye.
Spadia, aye.
Thomas, aye.
Catino, aye. And we are delegating signing authority to myself and Andrea per the decision issued on April 6th.
Agreed. Caulfield's aye.
Lundin, aye.
Spadia, aye.
Thomas, aye.
Catino, aye. Sorry, I'll try to remember to put that in the first motion next time. All right, thanks, Brad.
Thank you very much. Have a good night. Thank you, Andrea.
Good night.
You too. Okay, he's out.
All right.
Next one up is Scott Faria. He's in our attendees. He needs to be brought forward. I don't want to control your screen anymore.
Oh yeah, hang on. I got a bajillion. Hey, let me clean up a
I know,
couple
so
windows
many
here real
things,
quick.
right?
All right, and that's Scott Faria.
Yes, Scott is he's presently in our attendees. He needs to be brought forward, and he might have two
Hi,
personalities.
Scott, you there?
I am here. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, good. All right. I didn't think it was going to work.
I was just getting set up here. All right, so I'll pull up the plan, staff report. Just a moment. All right, is that a good view for you to start explaining? And do you want control of the screen, Scott, or?
Nope. I don't think I need it, Mr. Chairman. I think it's good the way you have it.
Okay, great. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about the project then, please?
All right. Thanks. We were before you folks, I believe at your last meeting, we're requesting a partial certificate of compliance for 290 Turnpike Street. Project that's been going on before the town for a few years now, finally got under construction within the last year. And just with timing being the way it is, the owner, Billy Papadopoulos, has a tenant ready to move into one of the units. But, just through the winter, there's a certain amount of things out on the site that we haven't been able to complete. He hasn't finished off the paving. He hasn't finished the landscaping. So in order to get a partial occupancy permit, a temporary occupancy permit from the building department, we need to get a partial certificate of compliance from you folks. So we filed this, I believe it was back in February. Andrea reviewed it. We had a few issues to resolve after our last meeting. We needed to add the permanent markers at the BVW. It was requested that we get some additional topographic information around the drainage areas. We've done that. And I think really that was the two outstanding issues. In addition, out on the site, there was some piles of debris, I guess we'll call it construction debris, kind of on the north side of the building. The owner has removed all that. And also the slopes were not stabilized. And within the last few weeks, he's put the jute matting down to stabilize the slopes temporarily until he can get his contractor in there to spread loam and hydro seed it. Which we're hoping happens, within the next few weeks as weather allows it. And then, as I said, once it should be fairly soon, late this spring, early summer, that he really is able to finish the whole site, finish the paving, landscape everything. And at that point, we would be before you folks for a final certificate of compliance. But as I said, right now, it's really just a procedural issue that we need a partial just so the building inspector will give us a temporary occupancy permit.
Rory, any questions?
So there was an original question that one of the stormwater features was installed without any oversight. Did we resolve that problem?
No, they were resolved. They were installed without oversight. So all we have is we've got a certificate of an affidavit statement that indeed the structures were are depicted as designed. We have to
Right.
go with their structural and
Okay, so
Sorry, just say that again. We have to go with their.
we have to go with the engineer's certification on that. We can't verify it.
okay. So
Yeah,
yeah, I understand, Scott. So
Okay.
it's just it's just one of those things where very poor communication, to be quite honest. So
On our end, for sure, the the contractor notified us. He was supposed to notify your office and obviously never did. So yeah, it was definitely poor communication on our end for sure.
Yep. The other question we had was last time was just that center island in the middle of the asphalt parking lot was
Yes.
it was different than was originally depicted on the plans, and now there's some discussion here about perhaps not having that island, or you just gonna put a lamp post there or something.
Yeah, what he's looking to do is make it as shown on this plan here. The original plan showed a pretty large, almost like a rotary almost, to kind of direct traffic. So it was a good sized landscaped area. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 25 by 25, right in the middle there. Once he got everything going out there, he realized that he could, I guess, eliminate that large landscaped area, make it smaller, and get some additional parking. So again, what he has right now, he has a request in front of the planning board for a minor modification to the site plan to allow for that, the reduction of the landscaped area as shown on this plan, the certificate of compliance plan that you're looking at. So that's before the planning board right now. It's still, it meets all the green space requirements, meets all of the any required setbacks for travel widths and parking size, everything like that under the zoning bylaw. So it's at this point, it's really something he's got to work out with the planning board as to whether or not they'll accept that as a modification to the site plan.
And your intention is to redistribute the vegetation that was meant to be planted there somewhere else on the site?
Yes, actually, on the modification plan, we're showing 3 red maples to be planted within this smaller landscaped area. And the rest of the vegetation exactly would be dispersed throughout the site. There's still a large amount of green space around, primarily in the front of the property. Really, there's a big chunk of green space there that we can work with. So we can make all that happen in those areas.
Okay, no other questions.
Right.
Carol?
I'm curious, what's the area of the smaller landscape area you're proposing?
It is, and it's just off the top of my head, but I believe it's 6 by 34, I'm thinking. So it's like 200 square feet.
I see. So tell me why red maples are a good choice for growing in a asphalt sea. There's going to be a lot of heat in the summer on the asphalt.
There certainly will be.
So tell me why red maples are the best pick.
If you have something else you'd like to suggest, we're certainly fine with any suggestions at all.
Well, I'm not going to suggest anything right off the top of my head. It's not
okay.
Parking in asphalt oceans is not something that I have done. So I would rely on you to come up with solutions that you can suggest.
If I may, Carol, through the site plan review process, I have the ability to comment, and I can bring that comment forward to the planning board and suggest something suggest one of the upland shade trees that are listed in their subdivision plant list.
Okay, that sounds good, as long as they're not the cherry cultivars.
Right.
And we also want to know, how are we going to irrigate whatever plantings go in? How are we going to get them established? How are we going to irrigate them for the first 2 years at least? There
is not an irrigation system out there, so he'll have to take care of them himself. He has a business right across the street. He's here all the time. That'll be up to the owner to take care of them, to make sure that they establish.
Is that something we want to condition?
I think if he's gonna go for something smaller like that, to add more parking in there, then I think you want it to succeed.
Hmm.
And if you want it to succeed, you're probably gonna want it to be automated.
Yep. I mean, he's spending all this money. He's certainly not going to want to spend thousands of dollars on plantings and have them die. So it's obvious, and you folks aren't going to accept it when he comes for a final certificate. So he knows, at that point he would have to redo it. So I can't imagine that he wouldn't take care of them. It's his property. I just don't see that it would be a problem for him to maintain it as anybody else would, with new plantings.
I mean, that sounds fine, but when you're talking, I mean, if you're saying that the island that was in there was 25 by 25, if it was a circle, then you're talking almost 500 square feet of green
Right.
space that you're getting rid of in the middle of, a bunch of impervious material.
Mm-hmm.
That's a percentage, of more of impervious. So I don't know if that's going to have an effect on your stormwater calculations, but we're talking about a site that's sandwiched between two, large wetland areas.
Right.
And we, kind of approved it based on a certain situation, and now you're changing it. Granted that island is out of our jurisdiction, but the whole, project we probably would have commented on a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as far as the drainage calculations go, the difference in the area isn't enough to move the numbers at all on the drainage calculations. But I mean, it definitely, everything's connected, and it's a little more impervious surface, even though it's out of the buffer zone. It goes into the drainage areas and into your buffer zone. So it's certainly, it's certainly something to comment on, and something will, as Andrea said, if she addresses it in the site plan modification, it's something we'll have to take into account. And either, if, to be honest with you, if the planning board says no, we don't like the change based on our own feeling of having a sea of paving out there, and the Conservation Commission also is against it, then he'll go back to what it is. The whole reason he's asking for it now is so he'll have a final answer before he puts the top coat of the paving on. So right now it's just the base coat. So if he has to, you can just chisel that out with a hammer. It's no big deal to get rid of it and put it back to the way it was approved. So, to be honest with you, I hate to say it and go against what he wants, but I don't think it's the end of the world if it didn't happen. He still has a bunch of parking out there. I can't imagine the extra 8 or 10 spaces he's getting is going to be that big of a deal breaker. So it's kind of on his wish list, I guess. Looking at it now, I guess he wishes we had looked at it this way when we first started the project. Had a small landscaped area, more parking.
Like anything, hindsight's 20/20.
Exactly. Once you see it on the ground, you say, "Oh Christ, look at that! We could have got a whole bunch more parking out there." So that's where he's coming from. But if it doesn't go through the planning board that way, he'll chip away the base coat, put it back to the way that you folks in the planning board approved it originally, and we'll just move on from there.
Great.
Just to chip in,
anything else, Carol?
Yeah, another option might be to, if the planning board does approve this reduced size, maybe put permeable pavers rather than asphalt around it.
Yep.
That way, if you do want to really try putting red maples in there, I mean, those roots, the canopy, the roots want to go up to the canopy. So
right.
Those roots would be under the asphalt. So
sure. Yep.
I don't see that as viable.
Okay.
So, but if you get more water under there by having permeable pavement,
that'll help support them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there are also, traditional, shrubs in parking lots that have a much better chance of surviving than trees.
Than the trees. Yep.
Yep. So maybe the trees can go somewhere else on the property.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's a good suggestion.
I think that just from my own standpoint is that I think that we should leave the comment to Andrea to sort of take to the planning board and
Yep.
allow her to sort of handle it.
Yep. Yeah, I'm in agreement.
That's what I'd like to do.
Yeah, that was my concern. I just want to see that green space just done right.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, great. Mike, anything?
Oh no, I'm good.
All right, John.
Not really, but I'm looking at these stormwater basins, and is that the shaded areas then like plus 90.8? Is that spot shot elevations there? Is that what those
Yes,
are?
it is. Yes.
Okay. So I presume that's after the fact. What's in dark is that as built or is that
Yes, it is.
proposed? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Those are the as-built elevations.
Okay. All right. Just confirming.
Sure.
All right. Any public comment on the request for partial COC for 290 Turnpike Street? All right, seeing none. So yeah, Andrea, you can bring our comments to the planning board.
Yes.
Great. So I'm okay issuing the partial, and we'll just do the commentary with the planning board and see what they say, and then what happens at the final COC. So I'll do a motion to issue a partial
Before
certificate.
you do, can I just raise 2 points just for your knowledge?
Yeah.
One is that there's a very sharp edge of pavement here. Sharp edge meaning there's an edge of pavement and then there's a steep slope down into the swale. The building commissioner, building inspector may ask that bollards be placed there.
On which side?
On the pavement side.
Down here?
Over here. On the long edge of the building.
Yeah,
Hang
I think it would be
Narrow.
the east side nearing the
There, do you have
the
control
side
now,
closest
Andrew?
to West
There.
Bridgewater.
Do you see my arrow?
No, it's not working right now.
Yeah, I don't see it either. But the side closest to the West Bridgewater town line, as you're looking at the plan,
Oh,
the
okay.
right
Back
hand,
here.
Yes.
yeah, the
I
right
see
hand
that.
lot line.
So there may be some
Okay.
bollards placed there for the safety of the traffic circulation.
Right.
And
Makes sense.
also on the other side of the building over where you see electric meters. Okay, down in this corner of pavement, a dumpster may be relocated from from the proposed location to right here, which is really the slope of the basin. It's not a big deal from the wetland perspective, but it is a minor change to the plan that
Right.
you should anticipate when this comes forward again.
Great.
I don't have any problem with any of them. They make perfect sense.
Now, Andrea,
Sounds like it makes
is that
sense.
turnaround for fire and safety?
No, this is 3 parking. Is it also for fire? Or there's 3 parking spaces there.
It's not. It's right now. It's designed for the dumps it was approved to be the dumpster location. So the trash truck could back right into that little turnaround area. Again, what the applicant wants to do is put the dumpster location right in the corner where the light pole is shown, right in that same location, basically, and turn the previously approved dumpster location into 3 additional parking spaces. He's big on parking.
Big on parking right now.
Can never have enough parking, apparently.
Yeah. So show us where the light pole is.
Is that this
it's-
LP here?
Yep, right there where Andrea's.
So are you
buzzing
talking
around.
about like this corner here is where they want to
Exactly.
put the dumpster?
Yeah, he wants the kitty corner it right there in that angle. So that's the other piece of the modification we have before the planning board.
Okay, so how does it work when the grease comes out of the fryolator with the fried chicken and the cheese sticks and the French fries? And
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like that going in here. It's, he does, if he had that kind of a use, he would need a separate grease trap. And it would impact the septic system, but he doesn't have any restaurants or fast food establishments proposed here.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
these are just changes that I just wanted you to know about. They're minor.
Okay. All right. So motion to issue a partial certificate of compliance with the conditions noted on the staff report dated revised April 13th, 2020.
Thomas, second.
All those in favor?
do we want to include on this the condition that Andrea is going to take our comments about the vegetation to the planning board?
Yeah, so amend that motion to include that Andrea will take our comments from this evening on the vegetated area in the middle of the parking lot to the planning board, and that signing authority has been delegated to myself and Andrea per our meeting on April 6th.
Thomas, second.
All those in favor?
Caulfield's aye.
Lundin, aye.
Spady, aye.
Thomas, aye.
Catino, aye. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, folks.
Good night.
Bye, Andrea.
Right.
Thank you.
Take care, Scott.
All right. Okay, 560 Foundry Street.
Okay, so there's a whole
We got a
slew of
couple
people
files.
to bring forward as panelists. I don't have my view of who's attendees and who's panelists here.
I see mine.
Okay, so Mike Toole,
Mike Toole. Yep.
he's going to be the principal speaker,
Yep. And Walter Marioni, right?
and Laurie McDonald. Well, Mike can tell us once we give him panelist. Once we upgrade him to panelist, he can tell us who's on his project team.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear us?
I can. You hear me fine?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, thank you. So
Good,
I
good.
think primarily it's going to be me tonight. Lori's on. She's mostly going to be taking notes for us.
Okay.
And I don't know if anyone else was able to join, whether John Novak or Walter were able to join.
I see Walter here. I'll promote him
Okay.
up to panelist in case he needs to add anything.
And Claire, is Claire?
Hi, Walter. You can hear us?
I can hear you. I'm just observing. So
You want us to mute you?
you can mute me, yes. And I only say that, and I say that respectfully because the kids are running crazy, and I don't want them to be distracted. I know how to.
Hey, it's all right. A lawyer is telling us to mute him. We'll take advantage.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks. Have a good one. All right, and Claire, that's she's for us, right, Andrea? She was
Yes,
consulting for us on this one.
In this case, she's our peer reviewer.
Peer reviewer, thank you.
She wrote a very detailed staff report.
Hi, Claire.
Hello. Came in April 9th.
All right. All right, Mike, what shall we pull up first?
So Stefan, do you want me to drive the bus or do you want to do it?
Whatever works best for you. If you'd like, I can give you control and.
Okay. Yeah, why don't we try that? See if that works.
Sure, let's see how it goes. I can
Okay.
always snag it back.
That's right.
All right, go ahead. You should have it.
All right, so I'm just going to start with a couple of overview items. First, we just want to acknowledge we have received LEC's comment letter of 2/18/20, which was primarily on the NOI, which we had talked to the commission about, and we had a 3/11/20, March 11th review meeting in the town hall office, probably one of the last meetings in town hall. With everybody to talk about the project. On March 16th, I uploaded about 18, I think it was 18 documents that responded to and addressed some of Claire's comments that were in the February 18th review and some of the outstanding issues. So I just want to bring everybody up to speed on where we are with that. As Andrew mentioned, there was an additional comment letter, probably based upon our March 16th documents that Claire posted last Thursday. Unfortunately, I just became aware of that at 2 o'clock this afternoon, so I haven't read that yet. So we're not going to address any of that tonight. The other thing that I want to acknowledge is that even after tonight, there are still things that we're going to owe the commission. We are in the process of doing wildlife habitat evaluations. We've got most of the site work done and most of the write-up done, but it wasn't ready for prime time to bring out tonight. So we're doing a lot of wildlife habitat evaluation work out there. We've completed drafts of the waiver requests, and the current draft is based upon the alternatives that were presented, the alternative that was presented in the NOI. And since that may change as part of this process, we held off submitting the waiver request. That way we can address waivers required for the alternative that is likely to be the one to be permitted. So that's where we are with the waiver request. And finally, we acknowledge that there needs to be a letter of map revision application to FEMA, and that has to be submitted to the town and to Woodward and Curran to review, and at the town to sign on to prior to submitting it to FEMA. But we've not done that yet. We've not prepared the letter of map revision and sent it to the town, to Woodward and Curran. So therefore, Woodward and Curran is doing the peer review primarily for the planning board, but they'll be reviewing floodplain and stormwater. So the floodplain stuff we just talked about, and they'll be reviewing the stormwater. But my understanding is that Woodward and Curran is holding up on their peer review based upon changes that might occur as part of the Conservation Commission process. So rather than go through a complete peer review of the alternative that was submitted as part of the NOI, they want to wait and see what comes out of the Concom process. So that's where they are with the peer review. They have a planning board meeting next week, Andrea?
Yes, 21st.
Yeah, so that may actually wind up being continued again. We'll see as we get forward, because I don't think Woodward and Curran is going to be prepared with their review comments, because I don't think tonight we're going to be able to come to closure here with the Conservation Commission either. So some of the main items that came up during the Conservation Commission hearing and during the peer review process were, first, the discussion of the limited project status of the project. And this is where, Stefan, I'm going to try to, if I can get to my desktop. You gave me control, right?
I gave you control of my screen. Let me see if I can give you, hang on, let me see if I can allow you to, do you have the ability to share? Do you see that on your controls there at all?
What I did is I pulled the documents that I was going to show you into one directory, so they're all in one place.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like you should be able to share.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that option. I'm seeing you driving, and there's no share option on the bottom of my screen.
Okay. Oh, right. Yeah, that makes sense.
All panelists.
Yeah, it's all panelists. Yeah, because the panelists can't share.
Okay. So if you want to pull documents up, I can tell you what it is I'm after.
You can make them co-host for just the moment.
Can I?
Yeah.
I don't know if I have that ability.
Yeah, you go to that little. Okay, I make them co-host.
Yeah, I think you might be able to.
Yes, I just did.
Okay. All right, Mike, try that now. Or it might take a minute.
Yeah,
I think, Stefan, you have to stop sharing your screen.
Oh.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay.
All right, so now I should be able to share my screen. So the first thing I want to share, see if this works. Can you see my screen?
No.
Cannot.
The bottom?
Let's try it. How about now?
Oh, there we go. Yep.
All right. So the first thing we did is we wrote a series of documents that we sent to Andrea and to Claire, responding to the comments that were made on the February 18th peer review. And the first one was limited project status. I'm not going to have you read through this whole thing, but we have a document talking about limited project. And the bottom line is that because the alternative access points to that western parcel have issues, and the issues are safety, site distance safety. We had a traffic study down out there, and proximity to the other site access for the eastern parcel. There's bad curvature up on the street. And then also, whenever we come in that side of the property, we have to cross wetlands. It's an isolated wetland in this case, but we have to cross wetlands. So we still have wetland impact. So because of that, we don't have an alternative that is less acceptable, less environmentally damaging, and less safety, or better, you know, a safer access than using the internal roadway. So our reasoning is that we therefore, see if I can open this up. We therefore qualify as a limited project, and pardon my flipping around through these documents, but what I did and you've seen some of these before, is I took some of the earlier alternatives that we went through. So this is pretty much where the eastern side access is proposed to come in. There's a connection that we're proposing that goes across here under the current alternative. This is an earlier alternative where the access came in. There's curvature site distance issues here, and there are site distance issues down the street this way. And again, we had a traffic engineer evaluate that, and it's just a tough intersection. And we went through a series of, this is a very similar location. We went through others where there was another one that came up through, that's the internal one. Oh, I guess I don't have it in here, but there was another one, instead of coming through here, it came through here on the property. And if it comes through this area here, it still clips wetland B up in this area. So the proposal that we have before you is to run this across here as a limited project. A little later on, I'm going to show you a new alignment plan that we sent in just today to Andrea. I can do that later. I can call that up now since we're talking about it. Go back to. I thought I put it in there. Oh, I apologize, I guess.
It's the top one.
Yeah, that's got to be it. No, that's the Vernal Pool one. Yeah, I just didn't put it in the right directory. I apologize. So this is a modification of the plan that's in the notice of intent. This part of the plan over here is exactly the same as what's in the notice of intent. One of the issues that we talked to the commission about, they've asked us, and Claire had asked us to review it, was there a way of coming across this wetland system and minimizing the impact? And if I can zoom in a little bit and scroll over here, the old alignment, the original alignment, the one that's in the notice of intent, came basically across here. And so there was a fairly large impact to this wetland system right here. This new alignment makes a curvature, zoom out just a little, makes a curvature up to the north, and then back curves back down to the rest of the site. And so it still clips the very corner of wetland B, and it still clips these upper ends of BVW wetland A. But this is a fairly significant minimization of the impacts up in this area. Total impacts before were about 5,600 square feet, and now it's about 2,800 square feet. So less than half the impact, about half the impact of the previous alternative. So that's something I know that the commission and the peer reviewer and Andrea have been asking us for. So I wanted to show you that tonight. So again, the rest of this alternative remains the same down here. And so there were some issues in this area here, which this curvature change does not address, but this does address the impacts to these wetland systems up here. And we looked at ways of getting around that corner even better than this. And you can only, because this is a fairly narrow road, it's a 20-foot road, you can only curve this so many degrees so that you can still have fire trucks, fire protection come through there. You gotta remember, this is an emergency access only. So this is the primary access And you also don't want to destroy the site distances along this road for the residents going from east to west. So this, I think, responds to some of the comments, some of the questions that the commission had about minimizing impacts to wetlands on the site.
Yeah, maybe like in particular to that crossing there. Yeah, I think
Sure.
that certainly addresses some of the concerns and can speak to alternatives analysis as part of the waiver request for sure. You know, I think the larger, you know, kind of hurdle to figure out was the filling of the wetlands where the actual homes are.
Over here.
Yeah.
Yep. And we are working on alternatives to reconfigure this side of the site. I couldn't bring them to you tonight.
Okay.
Okay. So that's why I say I know we're going to continue. I know there's a lot of continued discussion about what's going on out here. A couple of the other agenda items I'd like to talk about specifically are talking about this area over here. And, you know, just the alternatives that we're looking at that would avoid impacts to these three isolated wetland systems are in the works, but are not ready for prime time.
Have we done, have your wetland scientists done any studies of those particular isolated wetlands to, you know, note the quality and, you know, sorry, I'm looking for a word, can't bring it up to me. But like the effectiveness and usefulness of those wetland systems.
Yes, and we've been, one of the other agenda items later on, Stefan, is to talk about where we are in total with the wildlife habitat evaluations.
Okay, great.
And that includes these areas. It includes the area in between the two vernal pools, vernal pool up here, vernal pool E and vernal pool A. So
Okay.
we are in the process of completing, I think we've pretty well completed our field work. We're in the process of completing our reports on wildlife habitat.
Okay.
Jump into that one now if you'd like, and then we can jump back to something else later.
You can continue along on your agenda. I was just thought train.
Okay. Well, because the only other thing that we want to talk about besides wildlife, I think, is isolated land subject to flooding. There was a question as to whether or not, back into this one, whether or not those isolated wetlands also served as isolated land subject to flooding. And we did the calculations and analysis, and two of those isolated systems do not hold water. They're on a slope. One of them does hold water. It holds just 1,348 cubic feet. So it falls below the Wetland Protection Act threshold for an isolated land subject to flooding, but it falls within the bylaw definition of isolated land subject to flooding because there is not a lower limit threshold in the bylaw that we saw anyway. So the wetland F in the middle is an isolated land subject to flooding under the bylaw, and we would be displacing this 1,348 cubic feet. And so we wrote a memo, and I won't go through all the details tonight. I know Claire's been looking at this, and it may be in her comment letter that she submitted. We talked about that area and what the functions and values of an isolated land subject to flooding are, and how that area does or does not meet those requirements of isolated land subject to flooding. And in general, this whole site is sloping this way. It's sloping to the south. So when you get into these slope side isolated wetlands, first of all, a couple of them don't hold water because they're on a severe slope, and the other one does, but the slope is still to the south. And so the slope from this particular area that would be filled as part of this alternative, that surface water that would have collected there still runs to the south towards the river and towards the conservation area. So from a flooding standpoint, it doesn't contribute to any area flooding. And then we went through the other performance standards with regard to wildlife habitat and other issues. And that's all in that memo that we put together on isolated land subject to flooding. Finally, we want to talk about, this is an existing conditions plan. It's the existing conditions plan for the west side of the site that was in the notice of intent. We want to talk about wildlife habitat, and part of what we want to talk about is vernal pools. So here's vernal pool E up in this corner, and then if we come down and across, we've got vernal pool A down in this corner of the site. So if you look at, oh, excuse me, right here. So if you look at what's in between is we've got these stone wall systems. Here's the vernal pool. We've got these stone walls, existing stone walls on the site. We've got an existing stone wall here. Those we're talking about whether or not the area upland in between the vernal pools served as a migration path between the vernal pools. And first of all, vernal pool species don't do that. They migrate from their wintering estivation areas down to the vernal pool that they came from. So if they were living up in here and they came from vernal pool E, they would be migrating off into, let's see if I can move it over there. They'd be migrating off into vernal pool E from this area. Same way in A, if they were living up in this area and they migrating down to A, they would be going down the other way. So the likely area, upland area, they want mesic uplands adjacent to the vernal pools. So both of these vernal pools have likely mesic upland areas pretty much on 3 sides of them, including the area that's in between A and E. So in this case, there's upland mesic area here, there's some in here, and then there's this area up at here. And this is the area that we're talking about developing in. Come on, open up. There we go. Okay, so there's, and again, one of the other things that we submitted, it's all up in Permitize, is a whole series of graphics that colorize the individual resource areas. So we also have a graphic where we overlay all the resource areas on top of each other, which of course gets very confusing because a lot of times you're in a vernal pool buffer at the same time that you're in riverfront area, or you're in floodplain, or you've got wetlands overlapping in all those areas. So what we tried to do is I did by colorizing them when I saw you last by hand. We did by computer, and we put all of the buffer zones in. So this happened to be out of the double set for the vernal pools. So here are the 2 vernal pools that are in wetland E, and we've got the 100-foot vernal pool habitat under the bylaw, and then the 100-foot buffer under the bylaw around that vernal pool. And here's wetland A, vernal pool in A. And one thing that's unfortunate on these graphics is that the stone wall, which is right here, and goes actually through right here, doesn't show up. And we're going to have to add stone walls onto these graphics to make it more clear what the existing conditions are out there. And again, so here's vernal pool A, 100-foot habitat, and then the 100 to 200 foot, the 100-foot buffer zone. And so a lot of the development that we're talking about in this notice of intent slides in between those 2 buffer zones. So we're outside of habitat in total. We're completely outside of vernal pool habitat with this development, because you can see the grading and everything on here. But the roadway system is also, except for the area down here where we come to the cul-de-sac and we have the parking area for the trail that we're proposing to put there. So that's what's in the vernal pool buffer down here. And then there's stormwater basin in the vernal pool buffer, and there's a stormwater basin over here in the vernal pool buffer. And then ultimately, when the homes come in, there's a series of the parts of these homes that are in, and then a couple of these are also in the vernal pool buffer. So we're trying to evaluate the wildlife value and impact of this particular area here. And I think, I didn't want to take too long, Stefan, because I know we're going to have a lot of discussion on a lot of different items besides the one I went over. I just wanted to hit some of the highlights from what I heard from the commission, what I've heard from Andrea and from Claire, and just tell you where we are and what we have found thus far in those particular categories that I just discussed. So maybe the best thing to do is to open it to take the control back from me if you want, and then open it to your commissioners.
Sure, yeah. Well, I'll leave it up on this for the time being.
Okay.
You know, I think, you know, seeing that you guys putting some work into bending that roadway around the resource areas is great. You know, it sounds like you're putting a lot of effort into understanding the resource areas and what the development what kind of impact it would have on it, and you know, look forward to seeing the results of your studies. So I guess I'd be curious to hear what the rest of the commission has for questions and comments on this update so far. Rory, do you have any input questions?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, like we've always had questions about the impact on the vernal pools, and you heard us loud and clear, and I think you're trying to address those. But can you just, so if we're looking at vernal pool E, the contention here with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 homes that are in the vernal pool buffer, what's the contention there as far as impacting the vernal pool habitat? Because that's our standard, is we need to ensure that anything that happens in that buffer isn't going to impact the vernal pool habitat itself.
So this notice of intent was not filed for the individual homes. Notice of intent was filed for the roadway, the infrastructure, the stormwater systems, realizing that infrastructure is being built specifically for these homes. Every one of these homes, when it comes in it's going to come in for an individual order of conditions, because these are deeded pieces of land, and we want to have separate orders on each piece of land, so that when somebody sells their house, they can pass the deed without having to be encumbered by everything that's going on within the subdivision. We are obviously looking at all of this, Rory, because again, if you build the road, you know, the road is being built for these 7 homes. So we're trying to discern what the potential impact is from these homes. I don't have a complete answer for you tonight.
Right.
The goal right now was to assess, you know, what's going on up in here for habitat, and we've almost come to a conclusion on that.
I mean, I think it's going to be important for us to know, and agreed. I mean, I can understand here if we're going to approve the roadway and infrastructure, and the goal of the developer is to have this number of homes supported by that infrastructure, that we want to see that picture. And you guys have been very transparent to us, so I appreciate that, in sort of presenting the whole picture to us instead of saying, well, this is just the road, we're not quite sure where we're putting houses. I think that you've been, you know, clear what your ultimate goal is, which it makes it a lot easier for us, to be quite honest. Then we don't have to discuss it later on ad nauseum as well. So. Oh,
I agree. And I mean, you can see there's infrastructure that is part of this notice of intent, stormwater basins,
right,
that are there to serve this development.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I think it's going to be important for us to know those impacts, and I think even when we had a filing discussion about this, we talked about those vernal pools on the western side is going to be a little bit of a trouble spot. So you heard us loud and clear, and are trying to address that, and I think that's important for us, and it'd be important for the development in general. So until we get more answers on that, I think we're a little bit on hold on those questions.
Okay.
Right. I would add, Andrea, you have a comment on top of page 5 of your comments that I would like to look at. It's important to note that the presumption of significance has not been overcome for any of the resource areas on the property. I know that you're working on it. You're working on the wildlife piece right now, which is part of that, part of the study that needs to be done. But there is more to it than that. And we're also, I want to remind us that we're in a ACEC, and we do need more information. And I'll tell you the way that I'm going to go about evaluating this project is with the published last year, the Mass Association of Conservation Commissioners Buffer Zone Guidebook. It's for use with the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act, not the town in specific. This is what it looks like. And I would like to read a piece from page 1 if I could. I think this might be helpful. This is chapter 1, item 1.1. The purpose of this book. So the MACC Buffer Zone Guidebook is intended to be the primary source document for commissioners seeking information and guidance when reviewing activities in the 100-foot buffer zone to resource areas. So this is a guide that I would encourage you to have a good look at. I think the information that could come out of your reportings, if it was formatted in a similar way that this book is formatted, it would make it very easy for us to understand the results that you have. And I would also add on page 13, this is the beginning of chapter 2, the need for science-based decision-making. Conservation commissions should make decisions that are based in science in order to implement the WPA consistently and with credibility and equity. Science-based decision-making is important in the context of both the state WPA and the local bylaws. And I would add, sections of this guidebook discuss and summarize research, literature, and other science-based documents that provide the rationale and justification for making scientifically sound, defensible decisions at both the state and local levels. So as far as reviewing your project, the science is really important. And I would like to see, again, using the structure of this book to help us see what you have in mind. I would also add earlier, I was reading through some of the documents that you provided, and in one report, you were listing the impact on different areas by, the before and after impact by square feet. I would say that's kind of a not comprehensive report on impact. That's, an area report. It doesn't speak to the wetland values that are impacted when the activity is done in those areas. So again, I'm looking for science in a broad perspective as described in this guidebook.
So you're talking about this table, Carol?
Let's see, I can't see it. No, what I was reading was a text document. It was not in a spreadsheet.
Okay. Because I don't know whether, can you all see this table that I put up, table 5?
I can't see the headers or that's better. And what are the rows labeled?
So I'm sorry if the scale is bad. I can zoom in a bit, see if that helps.
Well, zooming out would help.
Can you see it now?
I'd like to see the column in which the rows are labeled.
That's what I have on my screen. I don't know what you're seeing. Are you seeing this, Stefan?
I'm starting to see some words in the left-hand column. the one column header I see is temporary SF and temporary percent. I can't see the heading in the column to the left of temporary SF.
Yeah, I see it fine. Proposed plan is 0 to 100 foot riparian, previously disturbed, 100 to 200 riparian, previously disturbed. Those are the columns.
Correct. Yeah, the first column is the resource areas and broken down and buffer zones in addition. That's what the whole first column is. And so the rest of the table, Carol, shows the temporary square footage, percentage impact, permanent square footage, permanent impact, total disturbance, and volume as volumes only for bordering land subject to flooding. So I don't know what this is. You said you were reading in the text. I've been updating this table as well, and I had sent earlier versions to the commission. This is this 5A that I'm putting in front of you tonight is an updated version from what was submitted on March 16th.
Right, thank you. So what I'm saying is that the area that's, what's the word in the an area that work takes place in, the impact of an area isn't just limited to the size of the area before and after. There are many other impacts besides that, or potential impacts besides that.
Such as?
Well, let's say if you have 100 square foot area that's forested woodland, and I have to think this through. I'll have to get back with you with an example.
Okay.
But examples are in this guidebook. It's things like what the slope is, what the.
Let me give you an example, if I may, Carol. Tell me if I got this right. If you have an isolated vegetated wetland that what is 100 square is going to be, you're going to lose 100 square feet of isolated vegetated wetland. Then when you go to replace that 100 square foot area, you want to not just replace its ability to hold on to floodwaters, but you also want to look at the other functions that isolated wetland provided. Does it provide, prevention of pollution? Does it provide any wildlife evaluation? So whatever multiple functions a wetland area has, the functions should be replicated on the site as well as the square footage area. Is that how you meant it, Carol?
Yes, it is a lot like that. Thank you.
Yes, and I agree. When we design specifically wetland replication areas, we look at what the functions and values were and the species that existed within the existing wetland that's being damaged by the project. And sometimes, often, we make the wetland replication area better because you may be disturbing a bordering vegetated wetland that has a lot of invasive species in it, for example. And so when you build a replication area, you don't put invasive species in it. You specifically put together a plan to keep invasive species out of it. And so you're not just replicating the functions of that wetland, but you're hopefully building something that provides not just an area, which we also do, but in function and improvement.
I understand the invasive species are quite an important problem, big challenge.
Right. The difficulty with any of the regulations is that you start with numbers, and there's not in the Wetland Protection Act, a wetland is a wetland is a wetland. It doesn't matter whether it's a forested wetland, whether it's a wet meadow, whether it's of high quality, whether it's of low quality. You start with how many square feet of a wetland that's being, so that's what this table and a lot of our application materials speak to, because that's the way the regulations are written. They're written in area and volume standpoint. They're not written in functions and values standpoint.
Right. So I think the functions and values are what we want to look at.
Okay.
In the long run, that's how we can, because the regulations are written in terms of functions and values. Do you disagree?
No, what I'm saying is the thresholds are written in terms of area. They're quantitative thresholds, and the quantitative thresholds for one of the reasons why we put this table together is because riverfront area, you can only disturb up to 10%, 5,000 square feet or 10%, whichever is greater of riverfront area on your site. And not all riverfront area, like not all wetlands, is created equal, but it doesn't matter. You have 5,000 square feet or 10%. Those are the numbers. So you have to respond quantitatively to the quantitative thresholds. Bordering vegetated wetlands, the Conservation Commission, unless it's a limited project, the Conservation Commission is empowered to issue a permit for up to 5,000 square feet of loss. Bordering vegetation. So you have to respond to the numbers. So that's what the application and that's what these tables do, is they respond to the requirement of the act that we respond numerically. When we do wetland replication area, it's a ratio, and it's not a ratio of how much functions and values, it's a ratio of square footage. It's, you know, at least 1-to-1 square footage, or some commissions want 2-to-1. It's based on square footage. It's not two times the functions or 2 times the values. And I don't disagree with you at all that it's important to look at functions and values of wetlands. I'm just explaining why we put everything so numerically, so quantitatively. It's because of the way the regulations have us deal with impacts and mitigation.
Andrea, what's your experience with that, looking at the numbers?
Well, I think the waiver request, you do start with the numbers. What it gives you a an objective way to evaluate the project against other projects, and that's where you start. And then in your waiver request, you are evaluating what the numbers mean. And I think Mike understands that we're not replicating areas of wetland, we're replicating functions of wetlands. And I think I believe in another one of our meetings, when we talked about the road alignment, one of the reasons we talked about possibly changing the alignment area is that a bordering vegetated wetland is more high functioning than the isolated wetland closer to Foundry Street that happened to have a lot of debris in it and invasive species in it. And so there was already the beginning of a, if you're going, not all wetlands are equal. And if you have to impact any wetlands on the site, you want to keep away from the high quality ones. And if you have to, so I think Mike understands quality as well as quantity, but it's in the waiver request that we haven't seen yet.
Right, and in your comments, you want to see that.
I actually very much appreciate the level of work that Claire has put in to review today, but I think that it's probably appropriate that before the commission gets into a level of detail, that we first just understand what information we need and then look at the whole project. I've got other things I could say. I'm just responding to to Carol's comment. I can come back into my seat, Stefan, if you want to get other commissioners.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I think the intent behind Carol's comments are good and bringing up the handbook and everything, but I think we also have to remember that the applicant has to work to our regulations and bylaws. So we just need, I don't necessarily want to overburden with extra requirements that are outside the the regulated requirements. I think that Carol's point that we prioritize as much scientific evidence as we can when making our decisions and evaluating these kinds of situations. I think that's very important. And yeah, I guess I would like to hear if anybody else on the board has anything else to add to this for now.
If I could just respond to that, the buffer zone handbook is quite a scientific endeavor. It plays very well to the waiver request for this project because we're in an ACEC where the highest standard of material is expected from the applicant, and the lowest impact is the thresholds for review are the most high, and the thresholds for information are the most high. So I actually would speak to the buffer zone handbook being a really good guide when we're doing an ACEC waiver.
All right.
It's not a requirement. It's only a guide.
Right. It might make your lives through the approval process a little bit easier and more concise. Mike, you have anything to add?
I'm just happy to see that that little driveway there was, at least we've done something with it instead of having the original plan that it was. And then obviously now I've been going out there a lot now, especially being quarantined, and just kind of checking out the area because I've kind of fallen in love with it. And I appreciate the fact that you, Mike, yourself, you're looking at it as well. We can clean some of these streams up as well, because there is a good amount of trash in some of these streams. So it'd be nice to see that get cleaned up. So that's all I really had.
Can I possibly add to that, Mike?
Sure, absolutely.
The applicant hasn't spoken to it yet, but the public interest part of the waiver was trail work or modifying trails. So we do have a GPS unit if you want to start taking a look at where trails might be best located on the conservation lands.
Sure.
Can you also do that?
Great, thanks, Mike.
With his phone? Maybe you guys can talk about how you're able to do it with your phone. But I don't think
he knows.
Okay, because the applicant isn't responsible for finding the trails on our property, but that would be very helpful information to include.
That's simple. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
John?
Yeah, I have a couple concerns and questions, but they can get answered later. But I guess, it's with the bordering land subject to flooding. I guess it would be with the eastern side of the development area. I think there's some BLSF over in that area. And, I don't see that on the plans. So that's definitely something that I'd want to see on the plans. Or the plan that I'm looking at doesn't show it. There might have been a revision.
Yeah, we did. We uploaded revisions.
Okay, I got it.
Still see my screen, John?
Yep.
We uploaded revisions to the plan showing the BLSF.
Okay.
And with the base flood elevations and everything from the modeling that we did. So that's one plan that we uploaded. And then the one I think you saw the floodplain compensation plan that we had earlier.
Right. I'm looking at that. And is that for the whole entire development, or is that for the stream area?
The compensation?
Yeah.
The compensation is for all floodplain fill on the project.
All right. So it's mostly going to be on the other property. Is that what I'm getting at?
Correct. Here's the property line. If you can see my screen still. Okay. Here's the property line.
I don't know. I mean, what does the commission feel on that? I mean, I think that if you're doing work on a property, it should be on the property of concern, correct?
Generally.
I think generally that's how we've preferred it happen. There's, I guess the way that they're attacking this right now, there's not much extra area that isn't a wetland, to do some of this mitigation work.
And
And
we did it here, John, because if you remember, I mean, this is the beginning of the culverted section of the stream.
Mm-hmm.
And then the culverted section of the stream runs down on the property, conservation property, runs down through here. And so we had this project going. And so we took advantage of having this project going and putting the stream back in to do the wetland replication adjacent to the new routing of the stream and to do the floodplain compensation down here. And then we have trails that connect from the western side of the site over into the trail system that's down here on the conservation land.
Okay, so the applicant's going to be using land owned by the commission to do
Correct.
all their mitigation?
Yes, and to also do the daylighting of that stream, correct.
Okay.
I mean, I think I can, John, if you don't mind, I think I can understand John's concern about if this was property not owned by the commission, how would, and it was owned by a private property owner, how would the applicant be achieving the mitigation?
Through acquisition, probably.
Okay, and I think that's one of the conversations I think that that is being raised here is that the mitigation and some of the public interest that's happening on our property, and I don't know if there's a discount factor on that, or if we just have to sort of say, well, okay, I don't know. I think that's part of the concern here.
Yeah, I guess my concern with this property is, it's being used for a mitigation area. I mean, do we want to designate an easement for this area on behalf of this applicant, and then the applicant provides some sort of swap for the commission? I don't know. I mean, that's just kind of what I'm trying to get at here.
That's a good question.
I think you also, John, will benefit from learning more about this particular spot, because it's if you zoom out to the context of this spot relative to the old foundry location, there is some while it is on conservation land, town-owned conservation land, it has been I'm sure Mike can provide a description of what the current conditions are like, and that there is actually a wetland enhancement going on conservation property by a private developer, and we would never get to that. We would never do that work ourselves. So
what you're telling me is that the area is degraded and they're kind of bringing it back to pre-existing conditions. Is that what you're getting at? Okay.
I am. I'm saying that, yes, exactly. And I think that Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, you can probably make this argument. Mike Toohill.
Yes, the area is somewhat degraded, not as degraded, obviously, as the rest of the foundry site. But matter of fact, this whole stream system up through here is somewhat degraded by the activities on the former foundry site. And so part of what we're trying to do is to, daylight a stream, create new bank, create new wetland systems. The floodplain compensation area will be revegetated. It's not a detention system, it's floodplain compensation. So it's a cut in the landscape. So we've been doing cleanup and revegetation in this area. And then I don't know whether you can see this little tiny inset, but here's the western part of the site. What we're talking about doing is extending the trail systems over here as well. So bringing a trail down from over in this direction down into this restored area as well.
So then I guess getting to my next point is the operation and everything of doing the work out there. Is that going to be done, by crossing a stream? Is that going to be done by, some different access? I'm looking at potentially at the construction side of things too.
So from a construction side, because the stream is in a culvert right here.
Yeah.
There may have to be some reinforcement over that culvert to make sure when you drive equipment over it, it doesn't cave. But you would most likely bring your equipment across through this degraded area, across the culvert, and then do the cut for the compensation area and work your way backwards, and then do the daylighting last, so that you have this area built, you have the wetland replication area roughed out. You do your daylighting, you do the grading with the daylighting, then you come back in and do the planting. That's the way I would think that you would do that, the order you would do that in.
All right.
It's a big project in and of itself, isn't it, John?
Yeah, there's a lot of components. I mean, there's a lot of other things. A lot of other agencies are going to have to get involved too. So there's going to be a lot of input on this project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know one of the comments that Claire had, I think in the February letter, I know in the new letter also, is, we need more detail on how these replication areas, this one and the one that's way up to the north, up by the roadway, how these replication areas, how this whole area is going to be constructed.
So, I guess just to cut to the chase right now, do you have a calculation for, just overall area of disturbance of wetland resource areas and overall mitigation areas?
I do. So the disturbances, this is the table that I was talking to Carol about earlier. The disturbances are all in the upper part of the table, the wetland disturbances in the upper part of the table. So if you look at, bordering isolated wetland, bordering vegetated wetland, here are the total disturbances, temporary and permanent. So here are the totals. And then if you go down into this area, this table down here, here's wetland area A and B. And again, here are the total square footages. So we've got about 10,000 square feet of BVW that's being created between this daylighting area and the area up to the north by the road. And we have 4,800 square feet of bordering wetland, but we do, and this is permanent, we do have 8,100 square feet of isolated wetland that's being disturbed by primarily the western, this is primarily that western side where those 3 isolated wetlands on the western side of the site are impacted. This
but you also have, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. This is the number that we're trying to chip down on, but I don't have that for you.
Well, in reality though, you've got a much bigger number that you got to look at, because you've got inside the 50-foot wetland buffer zone, you've got 92,000 square feet. You have nothing inside the vernal pool habitat, but you have, almost 90,000 feet inside the vernal pool buffer. It's a lot of disturbance in areas that, we typically don't see a lot of disturbance.
Agreed.
So, when we're talking about areas being, big hurdles to overcome in filling those wetlands and encroaching on the vernal pools, if again, we got to see what the results of your wetland and nature study kind of turns up. But you see just from that table there's a whole lot of disturbance, and it's not just the bordering vegetated wetland and the isolated wetland. It's also inside that 50-foot, inside the 100-foot of the vernal pool. And because this is all inside an ACEC, it kind of just elevates the review of those disturbances in those areas.
Okay.
So I guess what else what do you need from us tonight?
I guess I'd like to get feedback on the new alignment. Because that's the newest thing that we presented to you. And so I'd like to get the commission's feedback on this, make sure we, went in the right direction here, and that we're presenting something here that could see its way through an approval process.
I mean, personally, I think as far as the road goes, you went more in the right direction for sure. You know, I think some of the things that we had talked about previously was, you know, public benefit with some of the parking spaces that like right on the bend there.
Sure, there's some
And
here and there's some
yeah,
down here.
well, yeah, I know there's some down here, but more on the bend up there.
Yeah.
You know, just something to consider is, you know, there's a pretty good chunk of land on that corner that if you take away those parking spots, that's only inside the 100-foot buffer.
This right here.
Yeah, just, you know, something to consider when you're looking at, you know, housing layouts and minimizing impacts on the actual, you know, isolated wetlands and other things like that. Is, you know, that would probably be valued more than a few extra parking spaces for the public to use.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I don't know if the rest of the commission agrees with that.
No, I agree with that, Stefan, for sure.
Yeah, Stefan, I agree. I mean, I think if you look at this, you probably could swap that area you just selected there with the other one and the triangular piece D further down where it's closer to the cul-de-sac.
Down here?
No, a little bit north. North a little bit more.
Oh, in here?
Yeah, left a little bit. The D lot right there.
Yeah.
And possibly put the parking there, maybe, and swap it for the other house lot up there. Yeah, right there.
You mean this?
Yeah.
That house?
Is that a house there?
That's a house.
But I mean the parking lot to the north of D, to where the wetland.
Oh yeah, there's just like a little corner of
this up here.
Say? Oh, proposed snow storage
yes,
area.
right there, where you have those lots there. I mean, you could wipe out those parking areas there, put a house lot there, and possibly have a larger parking area for down close to where all those residents are. It's just an option.
Yeah, just more things to look at and consider. Okay. When you're just looking at minimizing, you know, some of these impacts is, you know, I'd rather see less impacts and less filling of wetlands than more, you know, parking spots. So, you know, don't necessarily feel married to those parking spots on the bend up there. You know, just to give you some feedback. You know, you guys design things, but just some thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add about the reshaping of the road. Well, it does kind of steer between the wetlands to an extent. It also makes the road longer, so there's more impervious material.
Yes.
So how do we evaluate that? And if you're going to build a road there, you know, the machines have to operate in the wetland no matter what. Whether we're going on the, you know, navigating between the two areas or we're going straight through them, you know, there will be an impact to that.
Yes, and we have permanent and temporary disturbance areas based upon construction envelopes. And we also, one of the reasons why it took us a while to do this is because it's not just a matter of road geometry up here, it's a matter of the stormwater network. How does the stormwater system work? Do we need to change the size of detention systems? Do we need to put in some other kind of proprietary BMP? So I know that John Novak and his crew had looked at that. And so this alignment has been engineered to the standpoint where they're comfortable that not just the road geometry, but that the infrastructure that supports the road is doable. And they didn't go further north, just so you know, because there's a wastewater pump station right here. This is a property line, first of all, and there's a wastewater pump station. Originally, I was thinking, well, why don't we just go up through here? But we couldn't because of the property, because of the pump station. And we didn't want to swing too far up and do this and go right through that isolated wetland. So we opted to clip, and that's why I want to get your feedback. We opted to, you know, to clip this part of the BVW and this part of the isolated wetland system.
Right. So what would help me again is some numbers about the, you know, scientific estimate of the impacts of making a straight road versus your curved road?
Impacts to, you mean wetland numbers?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
impacts
because
of-
that's exactly what's on here, Carol, is we've got pre and post numbers on here. So there's a huge change in the way that we approach it with the straight road versus this road. We went from 5,600 square feet of wetland, isolated and bordering, down to about 2,800.
Okay, and so, thank you for that. So tell me, when you say that the disturbance would only be temporary, what does that mean?
Well, whenever there's construction of a roadway, there's some, you've got a side slope, which will be a permanent impact. And then you've got areas off the side of the side slope where you have to have the workers operate, the equipment operate. And then what you do when you finish that up is you restore, you replant that area adjacent that goes to the roadway, to the toe of the side slope.
Okay, so I don't necessarily agree that that is a temporary impact. Once you drive a machine on a wetland, that soil structure is ruined.
Correct.
So replanting it doesn't fix that fact.
No, you rebuild it. You take it out and you rebuild the structure. This is very typical of almost every crossing I've ever worked on. You wind up with these areas adjacent to the roadway where there was disturbance during construction, and it gets compacted and the soil structure gets messed up. And you wind up coming back in as a restoration the same way you would in a wetland replication area. You dig that out and you put in wetland soils and some woody debris, woody structure, and you plant it. And you recreate. That's why it's considered as temporary, because you're recreating the wetland in the exact location where it was, versus under the road, that wetland's never coming back. So that's a permanent impact.
I see. And then what do you find is the success rate of this kind of wetland restoration?
The roadside ones actually work pretty well. What's a little bit more of an art, I don't have it on here, unfortunately, is the design. We're going to put a wetland replication area up here, is the design of the wetland replication area to make sure that that area has the right size and right connectivity to the adjacent wetlands, to make sure that the replication areas function as wetlands. And there's been a lot of study and literature, especially Joe Larson out of the University of Massachusetts, who's he spoke at, you may have seen MACC. I've seen him a number of times. I've been on panels with him where he speaks pretty harshly about the whole concept of wetland replication because he has seen any number of wetland systems that were created that were not really wetland systems. They failed. They failed the test of being wetlands. And so those of us that work in this field, we're extremely cognizant of this. And so we put a lot of care into the design of those systems, and not just care into the design, but we do monitoring to make sure that they're functioning and that the hydric soil characteristics are developing, that the water regime is correct, that things are, the habitat requisites that we put in there for songbirds or mammals or whatever it is we designed into that system are actually functioning. Because you'll write an order of conditions ultimately that say, you have to come back to us with monitoring reports to tell us how these wetland replication areas are working. That's a very common requirement on orders of conditions. I'm doing a couple of very large scale ones in Medway right now. And we're out there for, I think, 3 or 4 years doing monitoring studies on these wetland replication areas.
Okay.
And what excuse me, if you don't mind, what recourse do we have if 3 or 4 or 5 years from now the wetland isn't functioning as designed?
Well, you've always got the order of conditions, and so you wouldn't issue a certificate of compliance until the area actually complies with that condition. You always have enforcement capabilities as a conservation commission. Some commissions will, shouldn't say this, my client's not here, but some commissions will ask for a bond. so that there's a bond set aside so that if the town, if you will, had to come in, they do this a lot with stormwater systems that are taken over by communities. If the town had to come back in and do some work in that area, that there's a fund that's established to take care of that. So there are measures that can be taken in the order of conditions to ensure compliance on the part of the applicant.
Question, Rory.
Right. So, Mike, what are the environmental costs of having a work in progress of a wetland?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, when you build a road, wherever,
Yeah.
whether it's curved or straight, that wetland will be destroyed. That part of the wetland will be destroyed by the construction itself.
Correct.
And you're saying you're going to remove the soil and bring in new wetland soil and put some plants in. So when those plants go in, that's not a high functioning system.
Correct.
So what's the environment as far as ecosystem services? What's the environmental cost?
Short term?
Tell me everything.
Short term is, is obviously a reduction in the services that the wetland can offer until it starts to function as a wetland system. And what we're looking for is long-term success in those areas. And that area will be a high functioning wetland adjacent to the remainder of the main body of the wetland system.
Right. In your experience, how many years does that take to restore the full functionality if it's built and maintained and monitored properly?
It varies a lot, Carol. I've seen some that after a couple of years, they're just fine up and running. And then 2 years after that, you start to have invasive problems in it. I've seen some that, it takes 4 or 5 years to develop. And once they develop, they're running just fine. The Wetland Protection Act has a 2-year monitoring requirement. The Corps tends to lean towards more of a 5-year monitoring requirement, with the realization that, first of all, you're not going to develop hydric soils in 2 years. So it takes longer for all of these things to develop, and it takes some, benevolent oversight, some care, to make sure that you understand what's going on out there. I mean, part of what we do to get success in these areas, Carol, this is, we know there's a wetland here that we're permanently impacting by development. This one too, that we're permanently impacting by development of its roadway system. There's a whole living soil mass that's in these areas. That's not just, not just the mineral soils, but it's all the organisms in the soils. It's the seed stock. It's everything else. So we always take advantage of that and take this stuff out and stockpile it and reuse it.
Do you reuse it on the site?
Projects. What's that?
Will you reuse it on the site?
We do. Yeah, because whatever you can't reuse, you have to make. And you can make good wetland soil mixtures, but when you make it, it's not necessarily right off the bat. It's not a live wetland soil the way that these soils are. So we try to use as much of the wetland soil that's already there, that's already functioning there. We try to use as much of that as possible in the replication areas as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Great, that was good information. Rory, John, Mike, anything else you guys want to add for now?
I'm all set. Thanks, Stefan.
Can I go back to a few comments?
Sure.
Can I ask a question too?
Go ahead, Rory.
Just the question about the map revision, the letter of map revision.
Yes.
So, how long do you expect that map revision to take, and what is the expectation of the applicant on us moving forward without having FEMA have actually designated the revision?
Well, we would hope that you would move forward, because the town is going to be reviewing the application and signing on to the application. So the town and the town's peer reviewer ultimately have to agree with the way that the floodplain was defined before it ever goes to FEMA. So we're hoping that you would move forward as the town, since the town has approved the FEMA model, the HEC-RAS model, and the results of the model before it ever, gets blessed by FEMA.
So Andrea, what is the likelihood if the applicant and the town submit the map revision request and that FEMA doesn't accept it?
We have limited experience with this, but with Woodard and Curran's review, they actually have certified floodplain analysts that'll be doing peer review of the letter of map revision. So they have a pretty good idea of FEMA's, of how FEMA's going to respond. The having just reviewed a letter of map revision for another project in town, FEMA's very prescriptive as to what information needs to be provided, which models, which model versions. So I think that it's hard to. I'm going on Woodard and Curran's recommendation that if they're comfortable allowing us to co-sign it, that it's got a pretty good chance of getting through.
Okay. Well, what's the general turnaround time on the?
It was 90 days, but FEMA is clearly our COVID response team right now. Okay. But I can tell you that our other applicant out on Mill Street actually had his engineer go check with FEMA to see if they remember getting this request of his. So we might get a better idea of whether or not they left any people behind to do their regular work, or if everybody got redirected in the emergency.
Okay, thank you.
But I just wanted to point out, Mike Toohill is suggesting that there's two points of review in the LOMAR. We have not yet received the application of the applicant for Woodard and Curran or the town to review, and then but once we do get that information, there'll be the second review is the one that is performed by FEMA. So I thought when you said, when do you expect it, Rory, I thought what you were asking was when can the town expect it?
Yeah, no, yeah, that too, but I was just trying to sort of guesstimate the timeline on that. I mean, I think that Mike had indicated earlier in his discussion that was pending, and he acknowledged that it was pending. So, I mean, these guys have been pretty timely in responding to us, and I assume Mike's not going to wait 3 months to get us that. So.
Yes, it's the LOMAR that will help Woodard and Curran begin to do their evaluation without knowing where the floodplain boundaries get revised to, and whether or not it's a reasonable reasonable estimate of where the boundary would be. You can't do the floodplain analysis. You can't do your compensatory storage. So that LOMAR is very much a part of the initial submission to the town is very much a critical piece of information, I would think, for conservation to have.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that as well. Those are the calculations I would want to see.
Thank you, John. If I could add other points, obviously Mike has been very responsive and understands a much more extensive wildlife habitat is needed. I'm seeing this stone wall plan for the first time, and I think there might be some hope there for our migratory animals, at least our smaller animals. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how that stone wall work comes into his overall wildlife evaluation and the wildlife corridor issues that are addressed. The waiver request is, this is obviously a complicated site because everything we're talking about in terms of filling, bordering, vegetated wetlands, filling isolated vegetated wetlands, impacting buffer zones, daylighting streams. There's an awful lot of waiver requests individually, but collectively, you need to look at the whole system together. And so I'm very much looking forward to the science-based waiver requests, or how are we going to make, how could we make this right? And I wondered whether or not there might be some more alignments in the Western Road farther down because of the buffer zone impacts that Stefan mentioned. But I also, I wanted to bring up two other points. One is that Mike Toohill spoke to how the riverfront has an overall, in the state regs, has an overall 10% threshold for the entire project, regardless of whether or not it is, how many different notices of intent you have. This is one subdivision, and under the state regs for wildlife habitat, you can only impact 10% of the riverfront associated with the two perennial streams going along our southern boundary, and then cutting the property in half. I actually would like to speak to town council about the possibility of doing the waiver request, the overall waiver request, in a similar analysis. That we know that when you put a road along the western area, that the purpose of the road is to have lots along the side of it, and the lots may not be part of this evaluation. Certainly the stormwater is, but the grading and the houses are going to have their own impacts. And I'd like to see if we have the ability in our regulations to give a conceptual overall waiver request that says, for the project as a whole, this is what we're talking about now, but this is the reserve that when you come in for house lots, you have this much, you have this much in the bank.
Yeah, so to include this area in here, right?
Yeah, yep, and up here, but I'm not just for the what, not, I'm saying take the regulatory structure of the riverfront waiver and see if we can't apply that same regulatory construct to the waivers required for buffer zone, isolated wetland, BVW, bordering land subject to flooding. And say that just like in the riverfront, we should also be able to come up with a conceptual number of overall impact for the other resource areas and say, make it work across the entire subdivision. I think that in this case, it would give somebody like me more confidence that the road is the beginning of a larger subdivision, and you should understand that there is X number of lots on that subdivision road. Yep. And don't be surprised when they come back later. There's going to be impacts. You should have thought about it now.
So one way to approach that would be to do all the calculations now, and just realize that when the order is written, there are going to be separate orders written for all of these individual lots, but that the impacts due to those lots was accounted for in an earlier filing. And that is something you need to discuss with town council and see how we do that.
Yeah, I don't want to overwhelm the Conservation Commission, you guys, but there's a lot of impacts here, you know that. But you should, if you're willing to consider the subdivision, you should just try to get your head around the overall. And if you put something in the bank in this first waiver request, it'll make the other reviews go so much smoother, because it's so hard to deny an individual lot because of you're looking at a lower detail level that you hadn't looked at before and you just aren't comfortable with it. If you had something in the bank, you could say, okay, we'll just have to, we'll have more impact here now that we're looking more closely, but we'll take it away from somewhere else and it won't be any more than we thought. So I just wanted to, it's a tough concept. It's a whole different regulatory construct, but I think that it might be helpful in this project. If you wouldn't mind me looking into that with town council.
No, I mean,
I'm probably looking into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I even alluded to that earlier when we were talking about the vernal pool buffers. That, you know, I think we can't just talk about the roadways. We have to talk about the whole concept of, we know there's 7 houses in that buffer, and we have to understand that. So, I mean, I agree with the concept of let's look at the entire potential impact of the subdivision so that we know what we're getting into. I don't want to approve the roadways for the applicant to only start denying individual individual NOIs coming down the road.
Yeah, that just seems, thank you so much, Rory. I'd like to see if we can make that work, because it'll give the whole project a lot more predictability.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I threw this graphic up on purpose because this has all of the individual resource areas and all the buffer zones in multiples of colors, multiples of lines. It's just hideous to try to read this thing, but the overall takeaway from this is everything you go through here is in some kind of resource area or buffer zone. Everything. You know, and it's not that dissimilar on the eastern side of the site. And this is one of the reasons why I separated everything out, so you could see things separately, but you can start to see the overlap in things here.
I don't want to put Mike on the spot, but there are wetlands on the eastern side too.
Yes.
And there is waiver requests needed over there. It's not the filling and, overall, blowout. But it's really, there is something here. It is, don't forget that there's something over here.
Yeah, there it is. You know, you've got all this system here, and you've got these series of different kinds of overlays here, plus the floodplain. So the only thing on the eastern side that's kind of clear of all resource areas and buffer zone is this central part. You know, but a lot of the rest of the site, both sides, is covered by different kinds of jurisdictional areas.
So these waiver requests over here on the east, there's a little bit of road. If you could zoom in, there's a little bit of roadway and stormwater work here, which I don't know if that's included in your tables or not, but certainly it should be its own evaluation. It's.
You mean like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of these numbers are in those tables. All of the different impacts are in those impact tables, east and west. Those tables were not just for the western side of the site; they were for both sides of the site.
I'm getting a little tired. Are those, the 10% thing with the rivers? That does not apply to like a BVW, does it?
No, what I was saying is the regulatory construct of only allowing a maximum amount of impact across the entire subdivision is used in the State Wetland Protection Act relative to new impacts on riverfronts associated with perennial streams. And it's saying whether you do the impacts now or you do the impacts in a future filing, there's a maximum amount of area you can take, and you make that decision in your first. You identify that maximum number in your first order, and then every other order on that subdivision is an aggregate, a banking of they summarize the impacts right from the very beginning, and they speak to it as a cumulative effect, and you can never go over the number you approved in the first order. I'm saying that will happen in the riverfront review. It has to, but we might want to use that same concept, that same regulatory structure for all your wetland waivers. You might want to say in your first order, when we grant these waivers, we're granting maximum numbers and maximum numbers for the entire subdivision, regardless of the number of individual filings there are, and you follow those numbers through. It is done on a numbers basis, but when you do the numbers, when you do the evaluation and you decide on what that conceptual approval is going to be, you've based that conceptual approval on replicating functions as well as area.
Okay, thank you.
Might not
All
be
right.
more complicated, right?
This is a big, complicated project with a lot of work left to it. You know, still some things that we have to figure out as far as mitigation and everything goes. But I think we need to wait and kind of see what the habitat and wetland studies present, and kind of go from there.
Okay.
All right, one thing I would like to add is that in the waiver, this is 503. Where are we? There's a chapter or article towards the end of the 503 that has to do with waivers.
The burden of proof.
Yep. And somewhere I have a note that talks about the interest or values, including but not limited to. And so one thing I'd like us to keep in mind, even though we haven't had a chance to really talk about it together, this project is such a large site that I think it's maybe worthwhile to think about the cumulative effects of this project and the potential, the value of climate change mitigation in the wetlands as our storms become bigger. And there is a chapter in the MACC Guidebook that addresses climate change. So that may be able to come into our including but not limited to considerations.
I'd have to understand exactly which language we're talking to because I'm not seeing it here. So.
And okay. Let's see if I can find it.
Andrea, correct me if I'm wrong, but this project's gonna have to go through MEPA review, correct?
It does need to go to MEPA review.
So there's gonna be cumulative impacts associated with that.
Mike, when are you planning on doing the MEPA ENF?
Well, we only have to go through MEPA if we have a state action.
And that's gonna be the curb cut permit, correct?
We don't, it's not required for this section of the roadway.
Okay.
There's already a curb cut there.
Okay.
Right.
And you're not using state dollars.
Right.
And
Well, I think our regulations mention cumulative effects, correct?
what about area? Oh yeah, no, it's still
20.
That's a threshold.
That's a threshold.
yeah, right after you have the.
I mean,
state.
ACEC is a threshold too. We're automatic because it's ACEC, but that's a threshold.
So you do have to do an ENF.
Excuse me?
So you do have to do an ENF?
Not right now, we don't, because we don't have a state action. You have to have both a state action and a threshold.
Claire, I thought Claire, did you address this?
What about a conservation management permit? Do they need that?
No, we don't have natural heritage.
Okay.
Totally amazing.
Claire had questioned the need for water quality certification, I think, if I don't want to put words in her mouth, but that would be the one state action that could potentially be required.
Right. that, and then I guess considering how you all plan to handle the mitigation work going on town property, although since that's town owned, it wouldn't be a state land transfer. So that might not meet the land transfer.
Right. It's not a state action. That's correct.
Right.
Rory, I wanted to circle back with you about the including but not limited to piece. That's in 50320 B2. A buffer zone is highly likely to be significant to the bylaw wetland values listed in 1B. In protecting these bylaw wetland values in many ways, including but not limited to. So that might be a spot where we can consider a climate mitigation for decades to come.
Okay.
And again, it's in the MACC Wetlands Guidebook, a chapter about that.
Mike, have you guys done any designs as far as looking at higher storm, 50 or 100-year storm totals?
Mean higher than currently modeled?
Yeah, because I mean,
Increases.
we all know that the state's undergoing a review of their standards, and they are going to raise them. It's just a matter of how much and when.
Right. I honestly can't speak to that, Stefan. I'd have to let John Novak answer that question.
Okay. Well, we can talk about it for sure.
Okay.
I think we've gone over our 15 minutes.
Oh, yeah, this is the product that I mentioned is probably going to go way over. All right.
Any public for this one?
The only person left is our planning director.
Oh yeah, Imai. Yeah, any public comments? I'm not seeing any. Great. When should we continue to? When do you guys think you're going to have your next batch of information? Like the habitat study and all that?
What are the next dates, Andrea?
The next date is the 27th. And then after that,
May 4th. And after that is May, which, Keith?
Can't hear you.
May 19th.
May 19th on a Tuesday.
Oh, Keith up.
yeah, I'm probably not going to be at that 19th meeting.
And I imagine the submittal date for the 27th is coming up next week. Is that right? Is it a week ahead of it?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks ahead of it for additional information, not new filing.
Well, we have
Well, that would be today.
Yeah,
right?
we have peer review.
All right. So if it's 2 weeks prior to the 27th, that's today. So we couldn't be on the 27th. So we'd have to continue out to the 4th.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Motion to continue 560 Foundry to May 4th.
Can I just ask, do you expect all the information to be in on the 4th, or do you just want to do a subsequent review on a review of additional information on the 4th, but not everything?
Well, I think, honestly, if we have the different concept plans and we have the wildlife habitat evaluation, that's a lot to chew on in a meeting. So, if you are all okay with doing this iteratively as we generate the big chunks of information, then we can key in on those chunks of information.
I mean, on projects of this scale, I feel like that kind of makes sense. Otherwise, we're going to end up on, a 3-hour plus meeting just on this project.
At least.
Yeah, agreed. Iterative sounds fine.
Agreed.
All right. Can I get a second for my motion?
Second. Caulfield,
All those in
second.
favor?
Caulfield's aye.
Lundin, aye.
Spady, aye.
Thomas, aye.
Catino, aye. Thanks, Mike. A lot of good information.
Thank you very much for your time.
Good night.
And thanks, Carol. Claire. Sorry.
Thanks.
I'll give you your screen back.
Oh, my. 5-minute stretch?
Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, I gotta jump off. Got a whole lot going on over here tonight.
The only thing I have for environmental planner updates is that we got the delegation form signed by Stefan and couldn't get it recorded at the registry because they're not accepting single e-filings or e-filings from individuals. So I had to send it to town council in order to get it over to Taunton's registry. So maybe we'll have it the form in place for the next hearing. But the key is we also are speaking to Mass DEP because Mass DEP thinks you need electronic signatures when our town council is not the only one that says delegation is perfectly fine. So stay tuned.
Oh, good times.
Decisions might still be able to be issued.
All right, we'll see. Lawyers having debates. Good times. Okay. Any updates on signage, keeping distance at the conservation properties?
Board of Health is discussing it tonight at tonight's meeting. I gave them the proposal for both the conservation land trails and the community garden. And they would like to see these areas open and available, but they want to give more thought to social gathering, making sure we can avoid social gathering. Enforcement's always an issue for us.
Can we just get something up though on our trails? I mean, sure, they can give their thought to whatever they want, but the longer we don't have signs up, the less awareness we have that people need to be keeping their distance and respecting the trash. And I mean, if they want to amend them later, great, fine. But can we just do it?
Yeah, they'll be laminated 8.5 by 11 laminated pieces of paper that get put up on the trailhead.
Yeah. That'd be great. I mean, it's great that they want to have their input and think about social gatherings and all that. That's great. But in the meantime, I feel like we just need to get something out there. Otherwise, by the time the signs get up there, it's going to be done.
Right. You recognize, of course, that playgrounds are closed and people are getting ticketed for gathering there, and that's what they're comparing it to.
Yeah. Well, we don't have playgrounds.
Well, I mean, we don't want to close them. I mean, that's the issue.
Right.
Trails. Or you're saying we don't want to close the trails?
Correct.
Yeah. I think Rentham.
Well, I mean, I think that's our desire to, but we may get pushed to a point where we have no choice but to. So.
Right. Yeah, and maybe we add something onto the signs where if these rules aren't adhered to, we'll be forced to close the trails.
Yeah, loss of privilege.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't behave, then the trails will get closed.
Yeah, just
have a special
then we have to
conservation
deal with
badge.
enforcement, which I don't think we really want to do.
Right.
Right.
I think Rentham closed their trails, but at least making a statement, isn't that some liability protection?
But and Kristen Kennedy, who's the head of the health department, said that she thought that keeping the trails open was consistent with Governor Baker's mandate that you stay local.
Oh, it was
walk or bike
advisory too,
trail,
wasn't it?
You are better off than going, than going to some regional trail. So she's conceptually she agrees with us.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't seen Borderland State Park this busy in a long time.
We really should call it destroyed.
Yeah, exactly.
It's disgusting what people have done to that park and how they disobey the parking and totally destroy what DCR does every day. So,
oh yeah, it's horrible.
That's just my gripe.
So. Makes me happy for my known little pockets of secrecy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I drove by there. I drove by there on Sunday, and it was. I had never seen it that busy.
The only thing that made me happy is when I saw they were ticketing everybody parking all inappropriately. So that was nice.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you
that's
for
nice.
telling me because it's halfway between me and my daughter. I said, well, if we can't go to Borderland, I know some other places nearby.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Those are busy
Plenty of 'em.
too. Let me tell you.
All right. Anything else, guys?
I'm good.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Continue,
Lundin,
second.
second.
Callfels, aye.
Lundin, aye.
Spady, aye.
Thomas, I.
Catino. Excuse me. Catino, why? All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Thanks, ECAT. Thanks,
Thanks,
Andrew. Thanks, Steve.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good one, guys.
Good night.
Later.
Good
Bye.
night.